Hello, and welcome to AI Curious. My name is Jeff Wilser. I'm a journalist, I'm a human, and I'm curious about AI. Normally on this podcast, as faithful listeners know, we do a bit of a deep dive on one particular topic, like AI digital twins, or AI and productivity hacks, or the trouble of AI and deepfakes. Today, we're mixing it up. Today, we're focusing more on what's happening right now in the world of AI, why it matters, and where it's going. And to get a snapshot of the most compelling storylines in the AI land, our guest is Sharon Goldman, senior writer at VentureBeat, where she is regularly cranking out smart, well-reported articles on the AI beat. I would encourage everyone AI curious to check out her work and give her a follow on Twitter/X at Sharon Goldman. So in this episode, we cover some key insights from Sharon's reporting and what she sees as the most important topics to keep an eye on, including why the battle for large language models training data is so urgent and can shake up the entire AI arms race. We get into the details and nuance of the New York Times versus OpenAI legal skirmish, or not skirmish, but potentially really holy war, and why that's so consequential, and the coming battles between OpenAI, Anthropic, xAI, and open source, and whether there's much merit to AI hardware, like the kind of AI-infused Ray-Ban sunglasses, or whether that's all kind of silly nonsense. We had a great conversation that I hope you enjoy. But first, real quick, I want to give a quick shout out to Inc. Magazine, Masthead Media, and Amanda Pressner-Cruiser, who recently wrote a piece called 4 Ways to Get AI Savvy in 2024. I was surprised, honored, and thankful that one of the 4 ways listed was this very podcast, AI Curious. So listeners, cheers to you for being ahead of the curve. And if you haven't done so already, of course, please take a quick moment to give this 5 stars, subscribe, write a quick review, all that stuff. But for now, please enjoy my conversation with Sharon Goldman, AI-focused senior writer at VentureBeat. Sharon, welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Your reporting has been a delight to read. So I know how deeply immersed you are in all kind of the relevant and interesting AI trends. Let's start with something you've been writing about recently, and I think is emerging as a more and more important topic, which is AI training data sets. For larger context, talk about why this is important, why this matters.
Yeah, I think it matters. And the reason that I think it's so interesting is because it's really at the heart of what we know and don't know about AI, like large language models, like ChatGPT. They really are the backbone of AI models. Without the training data, AI models can't learn. So whatever you're outputting from a large language model or an image generator, it's really based on the training data that was inputted into it originally. And also, there are so many issues around that have come up in the news. There have been media headlines all year long and well before around things like copyright, bias, deepfakes, disinformation, labor issues. These are words that have become more common in the public discourse, and they're really all circling around the data that trains these models, whether they're data sets that were created years ago just for research before all of the generative AI hype or new ones being developed. So there's been news just in the past couple of weeks, for example, around the removal of a data set because of images, awful images related to sexual abuse of children. There's been, more mainstream discussions around issues of copyright, OpenAI and the New York Times, for example. So there's so much around that to dig into. So I think it's just going to become more and more important to cover.
Absolutely. Let's start with the context and the ways that this is kind of fueling or the fuel in the kind of competition between these various AI projects and companies, right? I'm old enough to remember like 5 years ago or 10 years ago in the tech space, there was a cliche that data is the new oil, right? And so as like the Googles and Amazons of the world grew, like they kind of grew in large part by hoovering up our data, right? And so data really helped fuel many of these monster tech companies. And now it's like that on steroids with data sets and how you have the biggest competitors out there. There's the Open AI, there's Anthropic, there's Google, right? There's like, depending on how you want to count this, half a dozen to 20 to 50 different competing AI projects, all kind of sort of trying to do the same thing with certain flavors and nuance. Let me ask you this. How important do you view is like the training, like scrambling for getting good data sets? Do you view that as one of the most important make or break variables for which of these projects will come out on top?
It is definitely one of the biggest variables. You talked about in the past, yes, big data was talked about as the new oil. Here, I feel like it is also, data is the oil of AI, but it's also in a way, so it fuels the engine. And in a way, it's on steroids in that you need so much of it.
Hmm.
It's big data, it's much bigger. So to train these very sophisticated large language models such as GPT-4, which was released by OpenAI, for example, or Claude, which was released by Anthropic, we're not just talking about millions of data points or billions. We're talking almost, in some cases, a trillion.
Yeah.
So it's just these massive data sets are required because you need enough knowledge. It's like trying to feed an AI, everything, because these are
Hmm.
general purpose language models that are needed to answer any question. So I think two of the most important variables are the data that's training the AI. And then, of course, you also need the compute, you need the power to allow the large language model to learn.
Hmm.
There are many other variables, and the use of those data sets is, there's a lot of math and technology that goes on behind the scenes for that. But you do need these large, they call them corpora, collections of texts. We're talking books, we're talking, the whole web, perhaps. And it wouldn't have been possible without the internet, because that's where a lot of the data comes from, is from scraping the entire internet.
Yeah, there's almost a philosophical angle to this too, of almost like what happens when you've consumed all the knowledge in the world or all the data in the world, right? So I can imagine it almost feels like a children's storybook of someone who read every book there is and read every newspaper article there is, and now what does she do, right? And so it's almost like I've one topic that's been kind of bubbling up recently is the idea that, all right, once OpenAI or competitors have ingested all of the internet, rightly or wrongly, we can get into copyright stuff in a bit. What happens now? Like, are they then kind of ingesting fake stuff? So, right. So there's only so much human written contents ever created, and there'll be increasingly AI generated crap. So now these data sets will be incorporating both authentic human contents as well as, if you will, inauthentic AI made contents. And does that kind of warp things? And I'm wondering where we are, like how far are we from that point? Do you have a sense, Sharon, on is that a 10-year away from that problem, or a 1 year, or a 6 month, or is that not a problem at all?
I think that it's evolving, and the s- this is where it gets really, really interesting. So, for example, this plays right into issues that we're dealing with right now. Why is OpenAI trying to negotiate with publishers like the New York Times? They've made deals with Axel Springer, which owns Politico and Business Insider. Why are they negotiating? Why do they want that data? It's because it's real time quality data.
Hmm.
So that's why this is an issue. Why does the New York Times not want OpenAI to train its data without proper compensation? Because they know how valuable it is, and they also don't want to be replaced. Um,
Hmm.
so OpenAI is hungry for new data. And Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, I think just said this week, he was quoted as saying that, they can't do it without copyrighted data. So that's where the legal wrangling and negotiations come into play. So that's kind of like the new data there. I'm interested in knowing whether human generated data will rise in value, because models need it so desperately. On the other hand, we think of they call it synthetic data. They don't call it fake data.
Right.
So AI generated data or synthetic data, off the top, it sounds kind of like, well, that's useless. That's not true. It depends on what kind of data it is, and it depends on how quality the synthetic data is. For example, in the medical world, in the biotech world, we're not just talking text, we're talking images and very highly specialized medical data. That can sometimes be hard to come by just generally because it's very private. It may involve rare diseases that don't happen very often. So there, synthetically generated data is counted on and required. And having better versions of that is a good thing. So a lot of these data issues are not necessarily good or bad. It depends on how it's used and how it's put forth. For example, you might say, well, do we have 10 years before all of human data is used up and we're all like slaves, creating data for AI models? But is that really true? Are these large models that are very generalized, will that play out to be the most useful type of model? There are many people who say that smaller models that are quote unquote fine tuned on
Mm.
very specific data at a company, for example, that might be the most useful for a use case at a bank. A company that trains its model on its own data, maybe basing it on a larger model, but a smaller, more targeted and expert version of that, maybe that's more useful. So I think there's a lot of that now, kind of like a whole web of we don't really know where it's going to go. So I feel like that's something too. Anyone who says that they know how everything is going to play out with AI, that in 10 years this and 15 years that, I don't think we even know what's going to happen 3 months from now, to be honest.
So 10, like if you look back 2 months ago, the Sam Altman OpenAI stuff, no one knew it would happen 10 hours from now, much less 10
Exactly.
years. Sharon, I love your surprise twist idea that maybe this scramble and battle for data will actually make human, uh, quote unquote, human data, like the stories that you and I both write as journalists, make that more valuable. Like, oh wow, could AI save publishing? That is a delightful twist. But let's I'm not sure I'm betting on that, but I love the idea of
Right.
it. But you mentioned the lawsuit for the New York Times and OpenAI. Let's go there. I'm guessing a lot of listeners are vaguely aware that the New York Times is suing OpenAI, and they get it has something to do with copyright, and get that okay, New York Times content has been used in the creation of these models and the data sets. Can you kind of briefly summarize though a little more of the what the explicit charges by the New York Times?
Sure. Well, just to zoom out a bit, we were just talking about how these large language models work. They're trained on these large corpuses of data, huge data collections, maybe, for example, taking everything from the New York Times and other publishers and adding it to their training system so that the model can learn from those articles. If those articles were copyrighted by the New York Times, then many people would say that that's stealing or plagiarizing. If you think the opposite, that it is fair, it's fair to use that content because it was on the web, then you would say it's fine. But either way, I think anyone with common sense can see if they've used ChatGPT or any other AI tool that if you can just go to ChatGPT and call up an article that would spit out from the New York Times, you wouldn't have to go to the New York Times
Right.
anymore, and it becomes a direct competitor to the New York Times, the AI model. So that's kind of what this lawsuit is about. The lawsuit was filed by the New York Times against OpenAI and Microsoft, which is OpenAI's biggest investor. And I think it's one of the most important copyright fights to watch this year. That's because the lawsuit maintains that OpenAI and Microsoft could be held responsible for billions of dollars in damages, that
Hmm.
they've unlawfully copied and used the Times works, which they say are uniquely valuable, and it also calls for OpenAI and Microsoft to destroy any of their chatbot models and training data that use the New York Times copyrighted material, which you can imagine would be hard to do. But I will say that this is something that legal experts have long predicted.
Yeah.
They've said that a case around AI and copyright and all the issues swirling around it could even make it to the Supreme Court. And here you have two very high profile case defendants and who they're suing, the New York Times versus Microsoft and OpenAI. That could be just what would be perfect to go before the Supreme Court. And the problem is that copyright law was not made for AI. So there isn't a lot of guidance into how this should play out. So there's a prediction that judges could go either way. There's really
Hmm.
good arguments on both sides. So different courts might come to different conclusions. It's going to be an argument about infringement of copyright versus the legal concept of fair use. And many lawyers I speak with think that this is going to go all the way to the highest court.
My understanding of the case is that there's almost two different buckets of complaint. There's like they showed examples of how, to your point, Sharon, that model could regurgitate. If you prompt it in a clever way, you could get the model to essentially spit back out an old New York Times article. And that's like clear plagiarism, copyright. That seems like an easy call, frankly. Yeah, that's not that's not good, and that's a clear violation of copyright. But that in a way feels like so that's a clear win for New York Times, but it also seems like you're shaking your head. I'm on my way up. Go on, jump in. The listener Sharon's like, nope, Jeff, you are way off here. Okay, step in.
Yeah, actually, the New York Times has a better chance with the input.
Mm-hmm.
The New York Times has actually a better chance to say, I mean, this is where it gets really complicated. So the output of the model, yes, you could say, like, if it outputted, the exact article, you could say that. But according to OpenAI, those cases are really that would be very unusual, and
Totally.
it's easy to fix.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and also that's also just not how the large language model works. It isn't inputting a whole thing and then outputting a whole thing. So their argument is that it's fair use to input it, and the output is not exactly the same, so that it's not a clear win for the New York Times. But the issue of the input, the training data, that's something that a lot of lawyers I speak with think is more of a strong argument for the New York Times. And also, as far as the output, it's more that a a lot of people the issue of fair use is an interesting legal concept. It's not just did you see get an idea from my content or use it. It's also one of the four components of fair use is does it affect my business? Is it a direct competition?
Hmm.
So that's why the New York Times is focusing on that OpenAI's model, by outputting things that are, either exact or remarkably similar to a New York Times article, are they basically putting the New York Times out of business based on their own stuff? And that's a strong argument that lawyers say is a big issue for fair use.
I totally agree that on the surface, it looks like the copyright plagiarism angle is a slam dunk, but to your point, that's probably has shakier legal ground. As far as the input thing, I'm really of two minds there. And to cop to some personal bias here, I can see both sides. As someone who appreciates
Same.
the New York Times and publishing, as someone who's written for the New York Times, who reads it every day, of course, I spiritually like being on Team New York Times. I also want to see responsible AI growth and can appreciate that. And where I really get stuck, and I don't have an answer here just to myself, is like, if imagine a super smart person who wants to read a lot of books and read a lot of articles, which is totally legal and fair to do. Like, no one's stopping a smart person from reading books and then writing their own books. That is fair use, right? And even like, if let's imagine that someone is, let's say I'm writing a ton or on a certain topic, and some other smart person reads my writing, reads others' writing, they get very well versed on this subject and they write better stuff than I do, they would be hurting my business and potentially even putting me out of business. But was that unfair? Right. So the fact that the Times argument that the overall end game of consuming and ingesting their content and then potentially in the future creating other content that puts them out of business, I get that argument. But if they're just consuming stuff that humans can consume and doing it better, is that unethical? I don't know the answer to that.
Well, and again, copyright law doesn't necessarily always align with ethics, but um, I think not from the New York Times standpoint, but if you think of the smaller players that are filing lawsuits, authors and artists, I think the issue for them, or you think of Hollywood and the issues that they've been bringing up around generative AI, I think the issue for them is scale.
Mm,
And that's what's so scary. So it's one thing if a person is smart and learns from your writing, your music, your art. But if they can produce it at 1,000 times scale, that's not something that a human could ever do. And I think that's what's been particularly frightening for those independent folks. I did speak to a research group called Eleuther AI, which
mhm.
created one of the largest AI training data sets back in 2020. Um, and they pointed out that what's interesting about the New York Times lawsuit and some of the others too is that at the moment, the big industry players and the little guys are aligned. So, like, you and I might be on Team New York Times, but if the New York Times negotiates with OpenAI and actually settles and they get their money and their people are training on, if an OpenAI is training on New York Times data, um, we might not end up feeling the same way if the writers at the New York Times are unhappy about that. You know what I mean?
Yeah, great point. And I'm glad you mentioned Eleuther AIs. Right, you recently published a piece about Eleuther AI. What else did you learn from that reporting and kind of how it fits into the game here?
Not sure why I find it so fascinating, but I do feel like the issues and the history surrounding the data sets that train the large models of today are super interesting. I think it's because AI used to be, it still is to some extent, but it's changing so quickly. It used to be primarily about research. It really wasn't a commercial play.
Great point.
The commercial use cases of AI models were typically behind the scenes, under the hood at a business. And now, everyone uses them. There's products, ChatGPT is a product. But previously, we were talking about a very academic world where people were trying to push the boundaries of what an AI model could do for science, for research. It wasn't really with in mind that this was going to affect society at large or that it would be used to make billions of dollars for some little company in Silicon Valley. So, many of the biggest data sets that are used today in creating and building AI models were developed several years ago. over the past 10 years, and they were created for the purpose of research. One of the largest is called the Pile.
Hmm.
It was created by kind of a grassroots, loose knit collective of AI researchers in 2020. It's now a nonprofit organization. And their whole idea at the time, this was in the beginning of the pandemic, they were just trying to figure out how OpenAI's new model called GPT-3 worked. GPT-3 was not open source, so you couldn't just like know exactly what was in it and how it worked. So you had to kind of like reverse engineer the whole thing, and that's what they were trying to do. And to be able to do that, you needed to develop some kind of huge data set that would somehow lead to being able to build such a big model like like GPT-3. So
Hmm.
they created this massive text data set called the Pile. It's open sourced, and it's like 22 sub data sets kind of stitched together. And what was unique about it at the time it was created, that it was the only data set of its kind that wasn't just this wholesale web scrape. It wasn't just hoovering up stuff. I mean, it did hoover up a lot, but they were at least discerning about it. They were kind of thinking about, what would I like a large language model to know? Do I want it to know about the law?
Hmm.
They made sure it was trained on all this legal data, including like Supreme Court briefs and free law.
Sounds like they had like a college
Precedent.
curriculum. They said, you will learn mathematics, you will learn law.
Exactly. Although it's strange, like it includes some funny things like YouTube subtitles and emails from Enron. I don't know why.
Sure, right up there with mathematics and laws, emails from Enron.
But they wanted it to know about coding, so
Yeah.
they scooped up all of Stack Exchange, that kind of thing.
Amazing.
Um, Yeah, and so, it's gotten a lot of criticism over the past year. One of the 22 sub data sets that comprises the Pile, the original data set, is called Books 3. This is a data set that has been covered extensively over the past year. It's named in several of the lawsuits around generative AI authorship.
I have a book. I
Um,
believe I have at least one book in that data set. So I
yes,
yes, I'm personally
absolutely.
aggrieved. Yeah.
Exactly. So these are books that are typically copyrighted. They were taken, people didn't know that it was part of the data set. It's an open source data set, so you can see it. So there was a lot of criticism about that from a copyright standpoint. Um, Luther AI was actually named in one of the lawsuits because they included Books 3 in their data set. But, they're not backing down. They're very much about researching and building these data sets for the purpose of understanding large language models.
Mm.
Without understanding what's in the data sets, you can't do research around how the models work. And the truth is, I feel like people don't quite understand this. We don't really know why the language models and the image models work the way they do. It's a bit like alchemy. We
It's
can't really
totally
pin
such a
down
great point.
why it works this
Even
way.
even the geniuses doing it, the experts, the smartest
Exactly.
minds in the field who are building
Yeah.
this, you press them enough, like at a certain point, we're kind of not sure how it works.
Not at all, really. They know
Yeah,
what they have figured out in many cases what works, but they're not really sure why. So
right.
this organization is one that's really looking into that, but a lot of people criticize the fact that these data sets include all sorts of copyrighted and in some cases offensive information within it. But this organization is building a new data set, an updated version of this. It's going to include new data, more books, more. But one thing they are trying to do, although they said they don't legally have to, they are trying to address a lot of the copyright issues and issues around licensing data, which turns out to be incredibly complicated. I had no
Hmm.
idea how many different kinds of licenses and permissions and this and that you have to deal with to try and figure out. whether you're getting all the permissions that you need. But they are trying to do that. So it's not, I think it doesn't end up necessarily being promised as a copyright perfect data set, but it's even bigger and they say it's substantially better. So just the story of that and kind of I feel like it highlights the nuances behind this because people might say, this data set is horrible. But the only reason you think that is because you can tell what's in it. The truth is that OpenAI's data sets and Anthropic's data sets are proprietary and closed. No one knows what it contains. So the fact people are only complaining about the ones that they can see into.
You can see the sausage being made with Pile. You can't see a sausage being made OpenAI, right?
Exactly, and these researchers pointed out, I thought this was super interesting, that that being able to see the sausage being made is really helpful because you can do research on then how that affects the performance of the large language models and what it means, even for things that are of interest to people and copyright. So, for example, one of the things that's at issue in some of these lawsuits and people's concerns about copyright in large language models is whether the model is actually kind of memorizing the
Hmm.
input. It's called memorization, and that's kind of unclear. And that's something that this organization is actually researching, and they need an open data set to be able to do that.
Wow. I mean, it's a lot to unpack there. A couple of quick thoughts. One is that Pile saying, "Hey, we're a nonprofit. This is for research." And that might be true. The irony is not too long ago in its inception, OpenAI said similar things, right? We're a nonprofit. We're just trying to build responsible, ethical AI before someone else does it in a bad way, right? So who and my second thought is, wow, what a golden time to be a copyright lawyer. if you're if
Yes,
you're a
I
copyright
think
lawyer, boom times for you.
absolutely. I think about that a lot.
So, Sharon, you recently wrote a piece on the five AI stories you're waiting for in 2024. We've already covered one of them, which is the kind of training models, training model war. What are some other stories and key themes and topics later this year that excite you and you're curious about?
Well, and some of them kind of weave and kind of interconnect with each other, but we were talking about OpenAI and Anthropic. These two research labs that are, developing these sophisticated, powerful, large language models and image models. OpenAI and Anthropic are increasingly competing against each other. At the beginning of last year, OpenAI was kind of at the top. They were riding this wave of ChatGPT. Anthropic had just begun. They were just a startup, and they actually uh, grew out of OpenAI. Its founders had left OpenAI because they didn't think that OpenAI was being strong enough around issues of security and safety. So they created their own model, kind of a rival of ChatGPT called Claude in March of last year. Coincidentally, the same day that OpenAI released GPT-4. So that kind of competitiveness, they're both seeking massive new funding rounds. Their valuations are sky high. That kind of rivalry, I think, is really going to heat up in 2024.
Not to mention when you throw in the elephant in the room that no one wants to hear talk about of everyone's favorite new owner of Twitter slash X, when you have Musk starting XAI and getting back to, and honestly, I wouldn't rule it out as a dark horse of what becomes one of the leading contenders here, given that, to your point, Sharon, of how important data sets are. Musk almost stumbled into this kind of accidentally, purchased this massive data set of Twitter and all of the tweets for the past 10, 13, 15 years. So that's a pretty big leg up in the training. And he has unfettered access to that and he shut that off from OpenAI or in Google and so on. So that could be a contender as well.
Absolutely, and Twitter is quality real-time data, so that's really important. So I think I agree. I think Elon Musk cannot be counted out, XAI. But kind of a dark horse is also open source AI. That's
Yes.
an area that's really been playing catch up over the last year, but it's a lot of people think that that's going to be a big news narrative over the next year. Just in last month, a French startup called Mistral AI dropped a new model. This is an open source model that, is considered to be, you know, nearly GPT-4 level. It's not quite, they're still playing catch up. But if you look at models like Meta's Llama, there are models from a startup called Together. Um, as I said, a Luther AI releases their own open source model. A lot of people predict that there will be open source models on par with GPT-4 in the first half of 2024. So that's kind of big because that, is big competition for the proprietary models from OpenAI and Anthropic, which people have to pay for.
Absolutely. One other buzzy topic recently that I know you've commented on is AI hardware. And recently in CES in Vegas, there were a lot of demos, probably way too many demos of AI hardware devices, and whether it's AI Humane, of course, has the AI pin. There could be AI watches. There, of course, are the AI glasses that from Meta, and the Ray-Ban has integration. What's your take, Sharon, on AI hardware?
Yeah, I don't cover AI hardware that much, but I will say that I was at a conference called Meta Connect last fall where they debuted the new Meta Ray-Ban glasses as well as their Meta Quest 3 VR headset. And I tried and now have the Meta Quest 3 headset, and I didn't get the glasses, but I really thought about it. I thought both were really cool and both have a lot of AI possibilities around it that I think are really, really cool. Um, I really think that there is plenty of room for AI devices down the pike. I think the same with the smartphones. It took a while to kind of shake out what was going to be the kind of winning slab,
Mhm.
so to speak. The iPhone had the smartphone idea, and then the iPhone itself, that was the game changer. So I think that remains to be seen. I haven't seen any of the handheld stuff or the pins that I personally am excited about. And the glasses were a little bit strange. I did think like, the idea of real time streaming and chatting, from the glasses, potentially videoing other people seemed a little sketchy,
That
but
sounds
I also thought it
horrifying
was
to me.
right,
Horrifying, I have to say. But
horrifying. Yeah, sounds terrible, but on the other hand, it was really cool to use, so maybe
yeah.
there is a use case that it would work for. The headset I thought was super interesting if they were smaller and, you really can use it almost as an interface in real time. If you could have AI embedded in that, I'd use it.
Yeah, yeah, I'm so torn. I feel like part of me wants to be not connected at all, just go away from me. I don't want to be that plugged in. But also, to your point, it's easy to see how wildly useful it could be, which I guess is like the iPhone, like our screen time. That's the same story, just a different verse. Sharon, how are you thinking about AI and drug discovery? How are you bullish on that as a use case going forward? Where do you think we might see some progress there?
I hear so much about this. I wrote about it this week because I hear about it so much. I get reach outs from companies all the time. There are such big, nine figure practically uh, investments into some of these companies. I think that there's such a strong future for that. It's considered one of the most promising use cases of generative AI because there's so much data that needs to be gone through, and as I said before, you need kind of like generated data, and you're not just looking for patterns and predictions, you're also needing to generate new data to analyze. That I think so many of the biggest experts in the field are bullish that I'm bullish too. On the other hand, I do read things from people who say that there's hype there.
Mhm.
So I feel like I don't know enough about it to know where that hype would be coming from. But to me, I mean, it's such a positive use case, I think. So I feel like why wouldn't we want to cheerlead for AI in drug discovery?
Totally agree. Last question, Sharon. How do you use AI in your own personal life?
I always get asked this question, and I'm trying to be really clear about it. I use image generators. That is something that I do use because for every one of my articles, I need to include an image.
Hmm.
And I will say that tools like Dolly 3 and Midjourney have been game changing in that regard as far as ideating and coming up with something quickly that really works for my story. I don't think a lot of people, there are some people who might not agree with using those tools right now, but I do use them. The other thing that I use AI for the most that people might not think of is transcriptions.
Mm,
So every time I do an interview, I have a real time transcriber going, my little friendly friend who's transcribing my interviews. It's been an absolute game changer. This is fully AI powered. That makes it able to do that. As far as my own writing, people might be surprised to know that I certainly don't use it to write my stories. It doesn't work well for that. Once in a while, I'll use ChatGPT for something if I have something very generic and I need to write it in a different way, like one sentence. I'll sometimes run through it and get an idea from that. The occasional headline ideas to kind of jumpstart my own ideation for that. But as far as actual writing, it's not that helpful.
yeah, same. I think maybe it's personal pride. Like, no, I'm the writer here. You're not the writer. So yeah, I also I'm a big believer in I've been using the transcribe AI injected transcription for years. It is so helpful. Totally agree. Sharon, this is a blast. I had so much fun talking to you. Thanks for sharing your thoughts. Really enjoyed it, and we'll be in touch.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
Well, there you have it. Thanks again to Sharon Goldman, who you can find at Twitter X at Sharon Goldman, and her work at VentureBeats. Definitely enjoyed the conversation. Thank you, listeners, as always. Hope you enjoyed. Subscribe, 5 stars, you know a drill, all that stuff. See you next time. Take care. Thanks again.